Part 1. A Journey and a Shock. Lady Helena Barrington sat stiffly in the hired carriage that bore her from London toward the distant county of Staffordshire. The roads were dusty from early summer heat, and though the windows were open, the scent of horse and leather hung heavy in the air. Her father, Baron Barrington, had been gone 3 months, gone after a brief illness that had left her household in confusion and grief. She had been his only child, indulged but well-trained, and though not yet 23, she possessed the composure of one much older. Still, nothing could have prepared her for the letter that followed his funeral, her father's last testament, assigning her guardianship to his old friend, the Earl of Wetherby. It was to this Earl's estate, Wetherby Hall, that she was bound. Helena had never met the man. All she knew was that her father had spoken warmly of him, an honourable, good-humoured soul of advancing years. She pictured a white-haired nobleman with a kindly smile, the sort of paternal guide who would respect her independence, yet offer counsel when needed. And though she would have preferred to remain in her own home, she accepted her fate with dutiful grace. The carriage rumbled through fields of ripening wheat, past villages where children waved and women curtsied, until at last the driver slowed before a tall set of iron gates. Beyond them stretched a long drive shaded by beeches and chestnuts, ending in a stately stone facade gleaming in the afternoon sun. Helena's heart fluttered with apprehension. She was about to meet her guardian, the man who would decide her future. But when the butler opened the great oak door, his face was pale with surprise. "Lady Helena Barrington, you have come to see his lordship." "Indeed," she replied, puzzled. "I wrote ahead to announce my arrival." The butler hesitated. "My lady, the Earl passed away some months ago." Helena blinked, the words sinking in slowly, like cold water. "Passed away," she repeated faintly. "But there must be some mistake. I was told—" "It is true, my lady. His cousin inherited the title. The new Earl of Wetherby is within." Her knees weakened, but pride kept her upright. "Then I should like to see him," she said, voice trembling only slightly, "since it appears I am his ward now." As she was led into a drawing-room of polished mahogany and sunlit windows, Helena steeled herself. Moments later the door opened and a tall man entered, not elderly nor even middle-aged, but perhaps 35. His dark hair was slightly disordered, his expression one of weary irritation, and his clothes bore the elegance of a man too accustomed to admiration. This, then, was Sebastian, Earl of Wetherby, leader of London fashion, known for his wit, his horses, and his remarkable indifference to matrimony. "Lady Helena Barrington," he asked, brows lifting, "you wished to see me?" "It appears, my lord," she replied coolly, "that I am your ward, through some unfortunate coincidence of names." For a moment, silence, then amusement flickered across his face. "Good heavens! My late cousin's affairs continue to surprise me. A ward, is it? And of age to command her own household, I imagine." "My father's will assigned my care until my marriage or my 25th year. I am 22. "Then I am to be your guardian for 3 entire years?" He gave a low whistle. "The late Earl was a cruel man indeed." Helena drew herself up. "I shall not be a burden, my lord." "No, I suppose not," he murmured, eyeing her with reluctant curiosity. "Though I warn you, Lady Helena, Wetherby Hall is no convent. You will find our household lively, our guests numerous, and our ways rather modern." "I am perfectly capable of comporting myself, my lord," she returned sharply. "Of that," he said with a faint smile, "I have no doubt." Thus began their uneasy acquaintance, 2 unwilling souls bound by circumstance neither had chosen. Part 2. A clash of tempers. The days that followed were a trial to them both. The Earl, used to freedom and flattery, found his new charge disturbingly unimpressed. Lady Helena regarded him with the polite reserve one might show a dangerous animal. Fascinating at a distance, but best avoided up close. He discovered that she read philosophy at breakfast, rode out alone before noon, and had an alarming habit of speaking her mind. She discovered that he rose late, entertained constantly, and refused to take anything seriously. Their first quarrel occurred within the week. It began over her wish to correspond with her late father's steward, a practical matter, she thought. The Earl, however, had been given control of her finances and saw no reason to trouble himself with account books and ink spills. "You must learn to trust me, Lady Helena," he said lazily, leaning against the mantel. "I assure you, your affairs will be perfectly managed." "By whom?" "You?" she asked sweetly. "By my man of business. I am not wholly incompetent." "Perhaps not," she replied, "but I prefer to know how my income is spent." "Independence requires understanding." "Independence?" His brow arched. "You are my ward, not my partner in trade." She rose, gathering her papers. "Then I fear we shall have little to discuss, my lord." That night he told his friend Lord Harborough that his ward was a most inconvenient paragon, all principle and no pliancy. Harborough laughed. "Give her a month, Weatherby. She will soften." But she did not. In fact, she fascinated him, not with charm, but with spirit. He watched her converse with his guests, hold her own among the glittering assembly of ladies and lords, and slowly began to see what others missed. Beneath the calm exterior lay fire and compassion. She tended his tenants with her own hands, spoke kindly to servants, and brought a sense of purpose to a household that had long been only ornamental. One afternoon he came upon her in the old rose garden, trimming withered blooms with delicate precision. "You have taken possession of my garden," he remarked. "Someone had to. Your gardener seems devoted solely to your stables, and you, Lady Helena, seem devoted to contradiction. Only when provoked, my lord." He smiled despite himself. "You will be the ruin of my temper." "Then we are even," she said, setting down her shears. It was the first time he laughed freely in her presence, and for a moment, brief and disquieting, she found herself smiling back. Part 3. Storms and Scandals. A week of rain remade the countryside. Brooks swelled into brown ribbons, lanes sank under mud, roofs leaked in the tenant cottages where thatch had gone unmended since the old Earl's last decline. Helena spent her mornings in the village with Mrs. Abernethy, the housekeeper, carrying baskets of broth and plaster, lists of needs tucked into her reticule. She returned each day with shoes muddied, cheeks wind-bright and eyes that glowed, proof that purpose had found her, or she it. Sebastian, Weatherby to most, rode out to see the flooding of his lower meadows and found Helena on a cottage doorstep, sleeves rolled, coaxing a fretful child to drink. He was struck silent. It was not the picture of charity he remembered from London drawing rooms, where beneficence required an audience and a flattering angle of the jaw. She looked up and gave him a business-like nod. "The roof needs patching. The well must be cleared, and Mr. Banks ought to move his milk cow to the far paddock. She will founder if this keeps on." "I shall speak to the steward," he said, stung by the ease with which she commanded his estate. "But Banks is a stubborn oak." "Then, my lord, we must be wind and weather." He laughed, and to his astonishment obeyed. Together they persuaded, planned, and dispatched. That evening, mud-spattered and tired, they stood beneath the north portico watching rain blur the lawns into watercolour. "You are not what I expected," he said. "I am frequently told so," she murmured. "And you, my lord, are exactly what I expected, until you are not." They smiled, uneasy, surprised, and turned back into the house, both a degree altered. When the skies cleared, London descended. Coaches rolled up the drive with crests like a pageant, the Duchess of Penrith with her lazy peacock eyes, Mrs. Larton, who collected scandals like snuff boxes, and a small army of mothers with daughters dressed as if for conquest. A summer fortnight at Wetherby Hall promised archery on the lawn, cards by candlelight, a private concert and, most importantly, the chance to place a glittering daughter under a glittering Earl's nose. Helena's black bombazine had softened to greys and lavenders, her mourning easing. She wore them without ornament, an unadorned column among the heliotropes and gauzes. The first evening, Mrs. Larton cornered her beside a palm. "My dear Lady Helena, how brave you are, so recently bereaved, and under the protection of a gentleman of such unsettling attractions." The glance at Sebastian's tall figure across the room carried both admiration and warning. "Some say he cannot pass a mirror without falling in love again." "If so," Helena replied coolly, "I trust he has made a most constant choice." Word ran swift that the ward was unimpressed by her guardian. This did not harm her. Men with a taste for wit sought her conversation. Women with a taste for novelty observed. Daughters, meanwhile, danced into the Earl's path like swallows above a river. He waltzed and laughed and retreated. Only when his gaze strayed to the edges of the room, to a lady in lavender listening more than she spoke, did his expression ease into something unpracticed. Contentment. The fortnight's first scandal arrived, as scandals often do, wrapped in a good intention. Helena proposed a charity fair in the village to raise funds for new roofs and a school closet for books. Sebastian, amused, offered the great orangery as shelter in case of rain. The mammas pounced. Needlework stalls, poetry broadsides, raffles, a musicale. On the day, garlands looped and tables groaned. Helena manned the bookstall, selling pamphlets on crop rotation as if they were epics. Children tugged her sleeves. She knelt to their height and taught one to sound out field and yield. It was there Lord Adrian Shelford found her. Shelford, heir to a viscount and lately cured of gambling by lack of funds, had decided that a serious wife would repair both his character and his credit. He had two assets, a handsome face and audacity. He deployed both. "Lady Helena, I have watched you for days," he declared, leaning too near under the orangery's lemon boughs. "You have the soul of a heroine. Permit me to speak to your guardian. Permit me to dissuade you," she said, stepping aside. "Prudence is the better part of proposal." He laughed, mistaking resistance for flirtation. At that precise moment a gust rattled the glass, a tray of oranges rolled, and Shelford caught her elbow to steady her. An innocent gesture, if ill-timed. Mrs. Lawton, entering, saw contact and took out her mental quill. By evening, whispers embroidered truth. Compromised, was murmured, then private conversation, then attachment. Sebastian heard them all. He found Helena alone on the terrace, watching sunset bleed into the lake. "You have been an object of extreme creativity," he said, voice tight. "So I have been told." Her hands were folded with such stillness that he felt both admiration and fury, for her self-command, for the gossip, for the fact that it tortured him. "If you were mine to—" He stopped, appalled at himself. "If you were not my ward, I would—" He stopped again. Helena's chin lifted. "If I were not your ward, my lord, you would do precisely what is right. The difficulty is that none of this is your fault or my doing." He exhaled. "Very well. Right then, I will kill the story." He did it not with threats, but with truth. He sought out Mrs. Lawton, presented 3 footmen and a gardener who had witnessed Shelford's impetuous balance, and added with lethal softness that Wetherby Hall did not receive guests who found their entertainment in maligning its hostess. By morning the story had not died. Scandals never die, but it yawned and lost its teeth. Shelford, however, was not finished. Rebuffed, he courted sympathy. "A poor fellow, wounded by a proud girl," sighed the mammas. "Perhaps," said one ambitious matron, "a lesson is required." The lesson was attempted at the Lake Regatta 2 days later. Guests cheered from the bank while gentlemen raced small boats across the glittering water. Helena, who had organised biscuits for the children and a cask of cider for the men, walked the bank with Sebastian, tallying the day's receipts. Across the water, Shelford's skiff lurched. He cried out, made a show of clutching his chest, then tumbled into the lake with Shakespearean abandon. Cries, a scramble. Helena, without hesitation, kicked off her slippers, tore loose her sash, and reached the water's edge when another figure cut past. Sebastian, already stripping his coat, plunging head first with a clean slice. He reached Shelford, gripped, hauled. On the bank, the rescued lord coughed theatrically. "Lady Helena," he gasped, "your kindness, your courage, surely you see—" "I see a man who cannot manage a boat," Helena said, shaking out her wet hair with inconvenient beauty. "And a guardian who can manage everything else." She looked at Sebastian, dripping, breathless, grinning like a schoolboy despite the fury that still sparked in him. And something altered between them, visible as the shift of wind on water. Gratitude slid into admiration. Admiration opened a door to tenderness. And tenderness, once invited into the house, has a habit of rearranging the furniture. That night in the library, after the guests had retired and the fire burned low, they found themselves alone among the books. Helena stood by the ladder, fingertips grazing spines. Sebastian leaned against the mantel, arms folded, as if to keep himself from moving toward her. "I behaved badly on the terrace," he said quietly. "Jealousy is a vulgar thing." "I did not think you capable of vulgarity," she replied. "Nor I." He tried a smile, failed. "I am loath to see your name in anyone's mouth but mine." "You have often used it with impatience," she said, and the corner of her mouth tilted. "Impatience is only passion with a bad mask." Silence, soft as the fall of ash. He took one step. She did not move. He took another. "You are my ward," he said as if binding his hands. "I am also a woman," she answered as if loosening them. He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head and bowed, the gesture both courteous and desperate. "Then for tonight, let me be only your librarian." He climbed, fetched down a worn volume, and placed it in her hands. "Milton," he said. He knew something of storms and virtues. She cradled the book as if it were an oath. "Thank you, my lord." It was not a kiss. It was something more dangerous. An agreement to wait. Part 4. The Choice and the Vow. Summer thinned to a finer gold. Guests departed with compliments and speculative looks. The house quieted to its original proportions as if grateful to breathe. In the hush, responsibility returned with a clearer voice. Accounts to settle, leases to review, plans for the schoolroom to finalize before winter. Sebastian surprised his steward by requesting ledgers at breakfast. "Lady Helena is right," he said when the man blinked. "Understanding is the beginning of independence and of decent husbandry." He spent long mornings with figures and land maps, rode out with the bailiff to see hedgerows that wanted laying, and came home mud to boot with an appetite for ordinary bread. The estate, accustomed to ornamental lords, tilted its head like a dog hearing its name. Then, all at once, it wagged. Helena noticed. She noticed, too, that he had not kissed her in a library, nor anywhere else, and that this abstinence filled the house with a warmth more potent than dalliance. It made her braver. On a bright afternoon, she found him in the stables with his gentlest mare, Laurel, whose temper could turn on a moth. He held the bridle loosely, voice low, patience endless. "You have tamed a creature everyone declared untamable," she said from the door. "I have learned to ask less and wait more," he murmured. "It was not a talent of my youth." "It is a talent of guardianship," she replied. He looked at her steadily. "Guardian. It is a word that grows heavier each time you say it. Does it weary you?" "No," he said, then, honest, "Yes, when it means barrier. No, when it means care." Her breath caught. "And what shall we do with words that mean both?" Before he could answer, the butler arrived with a letter bearing a London seal and a familiar slanted hand. It was from the solicitor who had executed her father's will, requesting Helena's presence in town to resolve a question regarding the conditions of the guardianship. The letter was cautious, legal, and yet glinted with urgency. It spoke of a clause her father had added in the last weeks, one Sebastian had not seen. Should the named guardian die before Helena attained 25, the guardianship would lapse upon the ward's petition, provided a judge found her competent to manage her own affairs. "Freedom," Sebastian said softly, handing the paper back. The word sounded like both a gift and a sentence. "I do not wish to leave under a cloud of gossip," Helena said, steady, "but I also do not wish to remain because the world misreads convenience as propriety." "Then let us give the world nothing to read at all," he answered. "We will go to town at once." In London, the season's tale still flicked through the squares. They took rooms at the Wetherby House in Brook Street, where the portraits of grim ancestors glared as if daring them to innovate. The hearing was set for a week hence. In that week, invitations rained. He declined most. She accepted one, an afternoon musicale at Lady Rutledge's, sponsor of wholesome entertainments and covert intrigues. He accompanied her, because not to do so would be to confirm a different rumour. There, fate collected its dues. Lord Shelford, drier and no wiser, appeared with the Duchess of Penrith and a pained air of magnanimity, as if he forgave Helena for not having married him at the lake's edge. When the music ended, corridors filled with silk and speculation. The Duchess, who liked the smell of scandal so long as it was not of her own kitchen, guided Helena, oh so casually, toward a small anteroom for a better draught. The room's door, once closed, latched, unfortunately. Shelford was in it. "My lady," he began, stepping forward too swiftly. Helena stepped back, very calm. "My lord, I advise you to step away from that door and from me." "Come, you cannot be so cruel," he said, advancing. "Everyone expects—" "They expect the worst," said another voice from the doorway, which opened on a decisive turn. Sebastian stood there, not smiling. "And you oblige them by being it." Shelford blustered. The Duchess attempted to look invisible. Sebastian did not raise his voice. He raised the subject of witnesses, 2 footmen in the hall, and the memory of a lake. Within moments, the scene deflated, and those present discovered pressing engagements elsewhere. Helena and Sebastian were left alone with the echo of what might have ruined her. "Twice," he said, softly furious, "the world has tried to take your name from you." "It failed twice," she said. "Perhaps because you were near. I cannot always be near. Then teach me how to defend it without you," she said. And it was the most intimate thing she had ever spoken. He closed his eyes, opened them and laughed once, as a man laughs when the last brace on a dam gives way and the river finally runs where it must. "Or marry me," he said. She stared, then shook her head, a breath of a smile trembling into being. "Is that the order? Learn to stand alone, or marry you?" "Both," he said simply. "I have never desired a wife who leans. I desire one who stands and chooses to lean sometimes, and I confess, Lady Helena, that I long to lean on you." Silence widened, soft and bright. She stood very still, then spoke with a grave joy that made his hands tremble. "You are my guardian," she said. "In law only, in feeling." She stopped because words threatened tears. "Let us first secure the judge's blessing. Then ask me again somewhere not crowded with duchesses." The hearing proved brief. The solicitor set forth the clause. Helena answered questions with gentle clarity. Sebastian testified to her capability with an enthusiasm that almost ruined his dignity. The judge, who had 3 daughters and an affection for plain sense, granted the petition. Guardianship lapsed. Papers were signed. Helena's hands shook when the pen left the page. Freedom, like cold water and sunrise. "Neither," she said, smiling up. "Let it be ordinary ground, proof that the miraculous lives best in the everyday." "Then tomorrow," he asked, "we review the schoolroom plans, speak to Banks about the hedge-laying and dine with the tenants?" "Tomorrow," she said, "we are wind and weather." They kissed, not as consolation after storms, but as the beginning of fair weather's honest work. And in the days following, Wetherby Hall learned to be not merely a stage for fashion, but a home, where a man who had once loved his reflection learned to love more what stood beside him, and where a woman who had been assigned a guardian chose freely and with a glad heart to be one another's keeper. They returned to the carriage and sat without speaking as it rolled out of the narrow court and into the bright churn of Bond Street. People flowed on the pavement. Milliners' windows flashed. A flower seller lifted a nosegay toward the glass with a smile as if blessing. The carriage turned. The noise thinned. "Lady Helena," he said. "My lord?" Helena, she met his eyes, and saw there not the dazzled rake of pamphlets and parties, but a man who had practiced patience in a stable, learned ledgers and dived for a fool and for her. "Sebastian," she answered. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, because the answer had stood ready in her all along like a lamp waiting for a match. He reached for her hand, lifted it, and, at last, kissed the fingers that had turned pages and tied sashes and steadied children, as if pledging himself to each use she had ever found for them. Wetherby Hall received them in early autumn, when beech leaves burnished and fields stacked with stubble glowed like old coin. The household rejoiced with an intimacy grand houses rarely permit. Tenants lined the drive with late roses. Mrs. Abernathy stood like a general surveying a victory. The wedding was held in the small chapel that had belonged to the first Wetherbys, sunlight turning dust to gold. She wore cream, he midnight. When the vicar spoke of vows taken before witnesses seen and unseen, Helena thought of her father, the baron who had loved her enough to write a freedom into law, and of the cousin who had not expected to love his responsibility, and found that it had been his salvation. That evening, after toasts and laughter, they walked out beneath a sky swept clear. The lake lay like ink. The house behind them glowed with music. They paused where the lawn fell to the water's edge, at the place where scandal had tried to bloom. He drew her close, the gesture not of a rescuer or a guardian, but of a husband who had learned at last the discipline and joy of care. "What shall we make of this place?" he asked softly. "A warning or a monument?" "Neither," she said, smiling up. "Let it be ordinary ground, proof that the miraculous lives best in the everyday." "Then tomorrow," he asked, "we review the schoolroom plans, Speak to Banks about the hedge laying and dine with the tenants? Tomorrow, she said, we are wind and weather. They kissed, not as consolation after storms, but as the beginning of fair weather's honest work. And in the days following, Wetherby Hall learned to be not merely a stage for fashion, but a home, where a man who had once loved his reflection learned to love more what stood beside him, and where a woman who had been assigned a guardian chose freely and with a glad heart to be one another's keeper.